Hello and welcome friends. Today is the time for us to start our discussion on Unit 4, wherein we'll have to talk about the political and socio-cultural environment. I hope you remember that we have discussed the PESTEL framework, the political, legal, economic, socio-cultural, technological and the ecological and the global forces in the environment. Today we are going to discuss the political and the socio-cultural environment. What do we mean by political institutions? So let us understand what kind of political institutions are there in India and what we mean by political institutions. Branches of government which create, enforce and apply laws. So these are the branches which create, enforce and apply laws. Now I'll give an example. Now this is the parliament of our country. This is the Prime Minister chairing probably a meeting of bureaucrats, and this is our judiciary, right? Now these are the three branches of government, and all of them have been entrusted a different job. Who creates laws? Not the government. Generally we tend to say government. No, it's not the case. Who creates the laws? It is the parliament. The people whom we elect as our MPs, they actually create laws. They actually legislate, and that is why they are known as legislatures. But then who enforces these laws? It is the executive branch of the government. This branch actually enforces the law. So the law is made by the parliament, and we know that it is also made by the state legislatures, the legislative arm, and it is enforced. It is actually enforced by the executive and then applied by the judiciary, right? So let us try and understand what we mean by this. See, this is the legislature. Now this is the central legislature. So at the center we have the parliament, and in parliament we have got the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, right? I hope you remember that we choose our representatives to the parliament every 5 years, right? For Rajya Sabha, which is also known as the upper house, Lok Sabha is known as the lower house. The total strength of the Lok Sabha is 552, and as of now there are 545 members. If you talk about Rajya Sabha, the total strength is around 250 members. However, the elections to Rajya Sabha are indirect. So we do not directly participate in these elections. Basically, our representatives participate in the elections. So the MLAs and the MPs that we choose, the MLAs that we elect, they actually go on to elect the members of the Rajya Sabha. So please understand that this is what we mean by legislature at the center, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, right? And we directly elect our representatives to the Lok Sabha. For example, if you talk about Pithoragarh, there is one constituency, Almora Pithoragarh constituency, and the last elections to Lok Sabha took place in the year 2019, and the next two elections would hopefully be taking place in 2024. Not before that. There could be midterm elections also at times, right? So this is our legislature at the center, and the counterpart at the state level. The counterpart at the state level is called the Vidhan Sabha. You understand this point? The assembly, the state legislative assembly, and the Vidhan Parishad, the state legislative council. So these entities, they are basically counterparts of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Is this fine? Now you need to understand one more thing, that Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are there, but not in all states do we have Vidhan Parishad or the state legislative council. It is only there in a few states. For example, if you talk about Uttarakhand, we do not have a state legislative council. In state legislative councils, again, indirect elections take place. Just like in Rajya Sabha, indirect elections take place. People do not directly participate in these elections. However, for Vidhan Sabha, elections take place directly. We do directly take part. We participate in these elections, and we vote for whomsoever we feel is the best candidate, right? Last elections, as far as Uttarakhand is concerned, the last assembly elections took place in the year 2017. Is this okay? Now, so these are the legislative arms of the government. They legislate. Legis means basically laws. So the job of these legislatures is to legislate, to make laws, to enact laws, to formulate laws, to design laws, then to discuss them, and then to finally pass these laws. So this is the job of the legislator. Again, at the local level also, we have got municipalities and Jilla Panchayats. In India, we have a Panchayati Raj system also, which is known as the local self-government. So in local self-governments, you have got municipalities and Jilla Panchayats. We have got Nagar Palika or Nagar Panchayats in the urban centers, towns, while in villages, we have got the Jilla Panchayats and the block Panchayats and the Gram Panchayats, right? So they are all part of the legislature. They are meant to legislate, they are meant to enact laws, they are meant to formulate laws. Now, once they have formulated the laws, who will be implementing these laws? It is for the executive to implement the laws. Now, this branch is known as the executive, and the term executive means to execute, to carry out. And what do they carry out? They carry out the orders, they carry out the laws, the directives of the legislator, they implement the laws enacted, formulated, passed by the legislator, they carry out their directives, and that is why they are known as executives, right? At the center, we have the central government, which is the executive. At the state level, we have the state government. Is this fine? Who is the head of the government at the center? It's not the prime minister, it is the president. It is the president who is the head. But however, since he does not have any substantial powers, he is understood, he is known as a nominal head. The real head is the prime ministers. Is this fine? So this is part of the executive at the center, the president, the prime minister, and the council of ministers. The prime minister is basically the one who is leading the council of ministers. So the council of ministers, all the ministers, they also form part of the executive at the center. Again, and then we have got the bureaucracy. You know that the governments change every 5 years, at times even before that, if there is a midterm election. So naturally, the governments who are there, which are there, the prime ministers, also the presidents, they cannot stay there forever. They have a tenure of 5 years. They can be removed. They may have to demit office. They can get out of the office even before the tenure is completed, even before that, even before 5 years. So they are not permanent executives. They are not considered permanent executives. Who are the permanent executives? The bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, the government officials, the secretaries, the joint secretaries, the cabinet secretary, the deputy secretary. These are the people who are considered to be permanent executive. However, while these three are elected to the office, they are not elected to the office. They are recruited through an exam. And the most prominent exam that takes place here in India, that is conducted here in India to recruit bureaucrats, is known as the civil services exam. In state, we have got the state civil services exam, right? Now, the counterpart of these executives at the state level is, at the state level, see, governor. Again, the governor would be the nominal head, just like the president at the center, and the chief minister, who will be the real head, just like the prime minister at the center. And then again, we have got the council as well as the bureaucracy, just like at the center. So these are the executives at the central level, and these are the executives at the state level, right? And the job is to execute the directions, the directives of the legislatures. Again, there is a separation of power between the center and the state. For example, if you talk about the defense, or if you talk about telecommunications, if you talk about foreign affairs, now this is entrusted to the executives, the central executives. So all the issues related to these will be taken care of by the central executive. Naturally, they will have to get permission from the legislator, right? On the other hand, there are some other areas which have been entrusted to the state governments. Is this fine? Now, for this, you can have a look at the state and the central list, which is part of our constitution, therein the areas which have been assigned to the center and the areas which have been assigned to the state have been clearly mentioned, right? Now let us talk about the third branch. So the enforcement has been done by the executive, the laws have been created by the legislature. Now the branch which is responsible for applying the laws is the judiciary, and we have got the Supreme Court and we have got high courts in different states. In some of the states which are relatively smaller, for 2 or 3 states also we can have the same high court. It also happens in case of some states and union territories. So however, in most of these states they have a dedicated high court, and then we have got the subordinate or the district courts that are available at the district level. So this is the judiciary. Now what is the job of the judiciary? Judiciary has to see that the laws are applied. Judiciary also has to check if legislature or executive, they are encroaching into the others areas or not. For example, if legislature does something that is meant for the executive to be done, then the judiciary would intervene. Likewise, if the executive does something without the permission of the legislature, again judiciary would intervene. The judiciary would also interpret the various laws, what is the meaning of that particular law, and they would then interpret the laws when there is a conflict regarding the meaning of a law. Is this fine? So this is the job of the judiciary. Now please understand, for example, I'll take up the example of the budget. We have been discussing Union Budget 2020-21. So now is the time for us to understand the whole concept of political institutions using this particular example. Now you know that the budget has provisions regarding taxes. For example, what would be the tax that will have to be paid by a person who is earning, let's say, rupees 10 lakh, or how much tax, what percentage of the income of a corporate organization would be taxed, right? So these are various provisions in the budget. Now please understand, who formulates the budget, who designs the budget, who decides what are going to be the various provisions of the budget, who proposes the budget? It is the executive. The government proposes the budget, but they cannot go away. They cannot straight away start implementing the budget proposals. They will have to take permission from the legislature, because the lawmaking is the job of the legislature. So what will they do? They will first of all come up with various budget proposals. The budget document would be finalized, and then it would be put for the consideration of the legislature. If we are talking of the union budget, the same is the case. Here the central government will table the budget in the parliament. In case of the state budget, the state government will table the budget in the state assembly, right? So the budget would be tabled here, and once it has been approved by the legislature, then only the budgetary proposals can be implemented, otherwise not. Is this okay? So, and that is why you know now that the budget is presented in the parliament, so that the parliament, the legislature, can assent to the various proposals, can provide their assent to the various proposals of the budget, and then only can the provisions be implemented by the government. The government cannot implement the provision without the express approval of the legislature. Is this okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is that the executive has the job to enforce, but they cannot make changes on their own. They have to obtain permission, seek permission from the legislature. Is this fine? Clear? And in case there is a conflict, then the judiciary steps in, right? For example, what if there is a conflict between the center and the states? Let's say there's a conflict between a central government and the state governments. Then, and naturally, this would mean that they are both interpreting a law differently. That is why there's a conflict between them. Then the judiciary will step in and they would interpret the law, what the law means, and then they would decide in favor of one or the other party, depending on which party is going by the law, whether the state is going by the law or whether the state or the center is going by the law. So this is the job of the judiciary. Now let us talk about the Constitution of India. Why we are talking about Constitution of India? Because now you'd find that the various provisions in the Constitution of India, they are linked to the business world. And this is what we are basically trying to understand. We are not studying political science here, we are not studying civics, we are studying these provisions, be it the political institutions, be it the constitution, and then we'll be talking about the intervention by the government in the businesses. So we are studying all these concepts so that we can better understand how the business world is being regulated. So our job is not to gain expertise in the constitutional affairs, on the political affairs. Our job is to understand how the political world impacts, how the political legal environment impacts the businesses. So let us talk about a few provisions of the Constitution of India which are important from the business perspective. First, fundamental right. Article 19(1)(g) guarantees right to freedom of vocation, means profession, occupation and trade. And there are of course some restrictions, but within those restrictions you can carry out any vocation of your choice anywhere. However, that does not mean that you start selling drugs. So that is what I meant by restrictions. So you can carry out your vocation, you can carry out any profession, you can engage yourself in any profession, you can carry out any occupation, trade in any part of the country. Nobody can stop you from that, right? Then Directive Principles of the State Policy. Now what is the difference between the fundamental rights and the Directive Principles of the State Policy? Please understand, fundamental rights, they are justiciable, which means that if your fundamental right is violated, you can go to the court. On the other hand, Directive Principles of State Policy are not meant to be justiciable. They are only some guidelines for the government mentioned in the Constitution. It does not mean that the government has to go by those guidelines, has to implement those guidelines. However, it is expected of the government to implement those guidelines, and whenever some law is being proposed, it is expected that the government will consider these guidelines by the forefathers, by our forefathers who actually prepared the Constitution, right? So these are Directive Principles of State Policy, and the name suggests the same thing. They are directive, they are only directing. They are not meant to be strictly. If the government does not strictly go by these directive principles, the government cannot be taken to court, and that is what I mean by saying that they are non-justiciable. You cannot go to the court claiming that this particular directive principle, the government is not going by this particular directive principle. So that is the difference between the fundamental rights and the directive principle. However, whenever there is a violation of your fundamental rights, you can straight away go to the court, and this happens through the writ petitions. So you can go straight away to the court, but that is not the case with Directive Principles of State Policy, right? So now some of the directive principles which have a direct bearing on the business world. Article 38(1), ART stands for Article 38(1). State shall promote welfare of people by securing social, economic and political justice. So the state, and what do we mean by state? The whole country view. By state we mean the whole system. By the government we mean the government. So the government shall try to promote the welfare of people by securing social, economic and political justice. You have been given political justice. You can access political justice. How? One single individual, be it an individual of vast experience, a very senior citizen, be it an individual with just 20 years, both have the right to vote in the elections and to choose their representative, and the value of their vote is the same. Be it a man, be it a woman, be it somebody from one community, be it somebody from some other community, be it somebody from a particular profession, be it a rickshawala, be it a big industrialist. Every single individual has been given the right to cast vote in elections and to elect his representatives, and the value of every single vote is the same, despite the differences in the backgrounds. So this is what we mean by political justice. What do we mean by economic justice? Economic justice, for example, the government provides subsidies to the poor sections of the society. You have heard of the various initiatives by the government in the wake of the COVID crisis and the ensuing lockdown. So this was an example of economic justice. Government provided the transportation facilities so that the poor migrants could return to their villages. They did not provide these facilities at subsidized cost to the rich people. So this is an example of economic justice. Now Article 38(2) states that the state shall minimize income inequality. So what do the governments do to minimize income inequality? Have you heard of the LPG cylinder subsidy? Or have you heard of the ration subsidy, the food subsidy that is provided generally to those people who are below the poverty line? It is not provided to those people who are very affluent. This is an example of how government is trying to minimize income inequality. Again, if you look at the taxation regime here in India, we have got a progressive taxation regime. What do we mean by this? Those who are earning more, they are taxed at a higher rate. Those who are earning less are taxed at a lower rate. Those who are earning less than 2,50,000 in a particular year, they don't at all have to pay any tax. But those who are earning, let's say 1 crore in a particular year, the incident tax rate is 30%. So 30% of their income they will have to provide to the government, they will have to return to the government as the tax. So this is an initiative by the government to bring this directive principle into action, to actually make this actually happen. So this is what the government has been trying to do. There are so many such examples. So you'll have to actually read from the newspapers and then think, and then you'll find so many such examples. I'll give you one more example. The LPG cylinder subsidy I was talking about. Now you've got a LPG cylinder subsidy. However, if you belong to an affluent family, you would not be given the subsidy. This is understood. So this is an example of how government is trying to take care of the income inequalities by supporting the ones who are poor and by taxing more the richer sections of the society more. Right. Article 39. State shall secure adequate means of livelihood to all citizens. So the government would try to ensure that all the citizens have some adequate means of livelihood. And can you think of some scheme by the government? Can you think of some initiative through which it is trying to abide by this directive principle of the state policy? I'll give an example. The Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It guarantees 100 days of wage employment to every rural family in a particular year, so that every single rural family can be given 100 days of employment, and they may be able to earn at least something. So at least for the 100 days the family is being provided some kind of livelihood opportunity. Is this okay? So this is an example of how the government is trying to secure adequate means of livelihood for all citizens. Then again, the government has only recently come up with this initiative after the lockdown because of the COVID crisis. They have said that they would be providing a loan up to rupees 10,000 to the street hawkers, to the rediwalas. Why are they doing this? So that these people can avail these loans and they can start their own business, they can start their own vending business, and they can earn their livelihood. So this is why the government has been trying to do this, and this is nothing but trying to go by the directives in the Article 39. Again, Article 41. State shall secure right to work, education and assistance during old age. Sorry, there's a mistake here. Old age, unemployment, sickness and disablement. So the government will try to ensure that everybody has a right to work. Everybody has got right to education, and when they grow old, they are given some assistance, or if they are unemployed, they are given some assistance. If they are sick, if they are disabled means physically disabled means sharirik viklang. So if they are suffering from these kind of issues, they would be given some assistance by the state. And India does have so many schemes which are basically trying to fulfill this particular directive. Now, for example, I have talked about MGNREGS, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. This is nothing but trying to give right to work to all the individuals, if not for the full year, at least for 100 days. Again, right to education. Now, this has become a fundamental right now. Now, in India, every single individual in the 6 to 14 years of age has the right to education. They can go for their schooling, and the government will provide for their schooling, government will provide funds for their schooling. So right to education now is a fundamental right, and in fact right to education has led to another duty which has been added to the list of duties that have been there, that are there in our constitution. One more duty now for the parents is to ensure that their children in the age group of 6 to 14, they receive education, right? They receive school education. So right to education is there. And then we have got the various old age pension schemes. For example, Indira Gandhi old age pension scheme. Then we have got pension schemes. So pensions are provided to people who are above 60 years of age, and they are provided monthly pension, though the amount is very, very small. It's around rupees 1,000. However, you can understand that the government funds are limited, and even that much amount might be of great help to some people who are from the poorest sections of the society. So Indira Gandhi old age pension scheme is there. Likewise, we have got a scheme to support those who are disabled, to support those who are disabled, and to support the widows also. So we have got a scheme to support the widows also in the age group of 40 to 60. So these schemes have been brought so that the government could assist these unfortunate sections of the society, these unfortunate masses who have been suffering because of either old age or because of having got widowed or because of being disabled. We have got disablement pensions also. So disablement assistance is provided to people with a physical disability. And then we have got unemployment allowances also are given. For example, in Uttarakhand also unemployment allowances are given. So these allowances are given so that the directives in the Article 41 can be abided by, right? Now let us talk about Article 42, just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. Just and humane conditions of work. So we are basically trying to say that the workers are not being exploited by the management. They are made to work in humane conditions. It's not as if they are made to work like bonded labor. So bonded labor is not allowed here in India. It has now been made illegal. It was made illegal right in the beginning when we unveiled our constitution. Then in Factories Act it has been provided that the provisions are that the toilet facilities would be there, medical facilities would be there, canteen facilities would be there, and there would be proper breaks between the work, and there would be lunchtime breaks, and so many facilities would have to be provided to the workers. So this is being done so that the conditions of work remain just and humane. Again, maternity relief. Only a few years back, the maternity leave that can be availed by a women employee the duration has now been increased. Earlier it was just 12 weeks, now it has been increased to 24 weeks, 6 months. And during this particular time period when the women employee is availing the maternity leave, she would be paid salary, the normal salary, so there would be no deduction of salary. So this is what the government has come up with. In fact, there is a particular law regarding this which is called the Maternity Benefit Act. Again, not only this, even for the women who are not employed anywhere, who are not working anywhere, and for them also government provides maternity relief, in the sense that the government is providing them maternity assistance. Some cash is provided to them when they are about to bear a child, when they are about to give birth to a child. So these kind of schemes and initiatives have been implemented by the governments. Now, adequate and living wages in all sectors. Living wages and adequate wages. So wages should be sufficient. Wages should be so much that the individual should be able to fulfill the basic requirements at least. And that is why we have got the Minimum Wages Act here in India. You cannot pay below that minimum wage. So whatever is the minimum wage, according to the Minimum Wage Act, and this minimum wage also gets revised after every few years, so nobody could be paid below that particular minimum wage. So this is again something that the government has done. Participation of workers in management of undertakings. Now this is Article 43A, participation of workers in management of undertakings. So it has been said that the workers should be given an opportunity to also manage the firm in which they are working. So they would not only be working in that firm, they would also be managing the affairs. So they would have a role in managing the various affairs of that particular firm. So they would not only be in the role of working, they would also be in the role of making decisions for the firm. And this has been achieved by coming up with a scheme for workers' participation in management, which you would be studying about in the labor laws and industrial relations course in the 5th semester. So workers' participation in management actually provides for encouragement to workers to participate in the affairs of their companies. So there are different levels of workers' participation in management. For example, in India, we have got shop councils. What do the shop councils do? They take care. And what do we mean by shops? Shops means small operations within a particular production firm. So maybe the paint shop would be doing the painting part, the welding shop would be doing the welding part. So here that particular shop means that particular work center. So shop councils will be managing the affairs of that particular shop. So for example, if there is a shop council in welding shop, then it would comprise of both the management people, the management executives, the managerial personnel, as well as the workers, and they will take care of various facilities in that particular shop. Do we have proper rest breaks? Do we have toilets and all? So these kind of things will have to be decided by that shop council. So this is an initiative to fulfill this particular directive. To go by this particular directive, we are encouraging our workers to also participate in the management of undertakings. Is this okay? A particular firm which had to be privatized in 1991, after we went for the industrial policy in 1991 and we opened up our economy and we also went for privatization of PSUs. That particular firm was not actually sold to any other private business. That particular PSU, public sector unit, was there. It was not sold to any private business. We'll be studying about this later on in unit 5. It was handed over to workers. So the workers were handed over that unit and they started managing that unit. And this was a very successful experiment. So this is again an example of how we are trying to implement the directive in the Article 43A. So this is now a brief idea of what all fundamental rights are there and what all directive principles of state policy are there, which are important for us in the business world. So I am not taking up all the fundamental rights or all the directive principles. I have not also talked about the constitution, which is incidentally the world's largest constitution. We have only taken up those few provisions which are more relevant to us in the business world, which are more relevant and which have a bearing on the business affairs. Thank you very much for your time. Now in the next session we'll talk about the government intervention or the state intervention in the business world. Thank you very much for your time.